So I'm curious, Gladys mentioned this idea of scientific wellness. Has anybody, just by show of hands on within the Zoom function, has anybody heard, is that a term that's familiar to you guys, scientific wellness? It's a little, buzzwordy, but I'll explain it because I think it's important. Functional medicine, those buzzwords. Okay, so scientific wellness was coined by Lee Hood. He's sort of a hero of mine. Was a National Medal of Science winner for his work in DNA microarray technology, and I have a picture when I visited him, and he invited me to come talk with them there for some projects they were doing in Alzheimer's and cognitive impairment. But he's coined this term scientific wellness, right? Scientific wellness, and there essentially are a few components, but its idea is that it's preventive, it's predictive, it's participatory, right? So it's sort of full contact, like let's see what we can predict and head things off at the pass. And so that's why I call it scientific wellness. Like I said, I'm an internist geriatrician by training, with a lot of, just some, like probably many of you, some uncommon interests, and sort of found our way with what's being called now neuroscience, but wasn't called that when many of us trained. I finished my training in 2015-ish. Okay, so I've been in practice, full practice 5 years post fellowship. So still learning, hopefully every day, but I think probably you need about 10 years in practice to really have good look back. So I'm always surprised when I get invited to speak in front of people that know more than I do, but thanks again for having me. So this slide here I adapted it from a consensus statement that's now about 8 or 9 years old, from an international working group. It came out of NIH, the National Institute on Aging. And it's basically the trajectory of cognitive function over time in Alzheimer's disease. So in the very soft line, what you're seeing, again, just shout if you can't hear, or something's not projecting, or my slides are messed up. Gladys, just interrupt, please. I have a lot of New York in me, so you can just feel free to interrupt. You know what I'm saying? So normally, I think, again, so what you're seeing here, x-axis being years or age, as people get older, move to the right on the x-axis. The y-axis is, how much cognitive function, so we want higher cognitive function. Higher is better in this rendition. And so over time, like things like processing speed, so usually we'll get to our 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. At some point, usually in the second half of life, whenever that, wherever you draw the line, we start to have some slowing. We have some slowing. And, whether it's processing speed or it's executive function, those are things that often break down early. But it's just harder to learn new things. And most of us, when we get to a certain age, kind of relate to that, or we feel that. And, usually I've been talking about, and people, of a certain age, yeah, that's true. There's certain things that get better with time, but not things like processing speed and the ability to learn new material are not things that typically improve. The trajectory here in the broken line is the cognitive trajectory of those suffering with Alzheimer's dementia. And, it's a little different for other dementias, but this is, practical purposes, this is pretty useful. And what we tend to see is that the early symptoms get ignored classically, people go to a primary care doctor, maybe even a psychologist, or they're sent to a psychologist, or maybe a neurologist, and say, well, you're stressed out, you're just getting a little older. By the time someone's 55, 60 years old, they've kind of gone through menopause, and things have changed a little bit. I cannot tell you the number of people that I've seen. It's getting now in the dozens, people that were sort of 52, 55 years old, and they were sort of waved off as having anxiety, and 2-3 years later, they're like they have a loss of independence, they have dementia. Now, no one is thinking when someone's coming in with a little bit of memory problems that's 52 years old. I certainly am not typically thinking, or certainly you didn't used to think, that someone's 52 years old is coming in with sort of some memory problems, going through a menopausal transition, and is also anxious, is developing Alzheimer's. But I think my point is that, like, things build, and we don't know how long this period is. There's a lot of people that are really interested in this sort of what's called subjective cognitive impairment stage, as you guys probably know now. Ron Peterson, the group at Mayo, is really interested in this from a a prevention standpoint. When can you introduce medications, drugs, PET scans, et cetera, amyloid scans? But early symptoms are going to be starting 5, 10, even maybe 30 years in advance, right? So we try not to ignore, because by the time someone comes in your office, or for those of you that have offices, and you're doing some like an 8 to 10 minute screener, like a mini mental status exam or a Montreal cognitive assessment or a SLUMS, any of these like these 30-point scores, and they're scoring abnormal. By that point, to rank them as sort of like a mild cognitive impairment, they have, and I think this just doesn't sink in for most of us, they have a catastrophic amount of brain damage, and that's it's a catastrophic. I make the analogy, and I have a better slide for this. In a couple slides, that to me it feels like the early days in neuroscience. It feels like the early days of where we were with HIV in the late 70s, early 80s, mid 80s, really. Where we're starting to have some tools that help people, but they're sort of general. We're trying to become more precise with them. The technology is certainly advanced, and I think that's obviously what's allowed us to know more with the neuroscience. But it reminds me of the very early days, even cancer. We had just a few, at least what I've read, a few medications that were just like, these big hammers. And because what's happening with people is that they'll come into my office and they'll say, or, I'll meet them out in the street, or they, whatever, somehow somebody gets my number or email, and they say, I know there's a problem. I know there's a problem, but my doctors told me I'm getting older, or, you know this list, it's normal, there's nothing I can do about it. Where people, like I'd say for most people like us, if it's happening, we're in the middle of raising our kids, or building our careers, or dealing with angry bosses, or, taking care of sick parents, or whatever it is, or dealing with spousal issues, or going through a divorce, and add COVID on top of that. And so people just don't have time, and they need it tight. They need it clear. They need it not too much, and they don't have. It's like it's not a full-time job for them to sort of understand what they need from a brain health perspective or a mood perspective. But the reason it's important to recognize things in the early stage is because what I call yellow light symptoms is because that's when, so far, what we've seen when we can really get somebody comes in with a problem that we can solve. It's usually in a subjective or early mild cognitive impairment. We do have improvements with people who have full dementia, but it's not like, it's not, we've reversed this completely. And I think that you hear some of that around, and I know some of the people that are, have created some of that conversation. And it's important in terms of moving the needle, but I think we also have to be cautious in how we communicate these things to our patients and the general public. That the key takeaway here is that obviously prevention is the best, right? But prevention is not sexy. It doesn't sell. People aren't after that. You might want to talk about brain optimization, and so some people are able to sort of latch onto that. But most people, as we all know, come in when they have symptoms. So SCI would be subjective cognitive impairment. That's where someone says, hey, I know there's a problem, and maybe my spouse has noticed it or my kids have noticed it, but I did the test and they didn't really find much. But I know there's a problem. And I've seen that. I mean, we had a woman come in a few months ago. This is just a nice little example. We've published a couple cases where we've had real improvements and wonderfully diagnosed, like the amnestic MCI, so very clear preclinical or prodromal Alzheimer's, like APOE4, and brain studies and neuropsych tests for a couple of people in their, one in his very late 60s, early 70s, and another woman in her 77 had a reversion of symptoms, had some reversal or improvement in their symptoms. But we had a woman that was 59 when she first came into the office. Her mother passed away in a nursing home from Alzheimer's. She had known a copy of APOE4, which of course raises the risk significantly, 2, 3, 5, 8 times, depending on how many copies and which study you're looking at, raises the risk of Alzheimer's terrifically. But in her case, she already had mild cognitive impairment. So this is a woman that was handling sort of multi-million-dollar client sort of cases and loads for her marketing job. And she was showing up late, showing up on the wrong days for appointments. She had a run that she was doing for 2 or 3 years, and she got lost a couple times on the run. getting kind of disoriented on the road. So very, very scary symptoms. And with her mom, so knowing that her mom passed away with Alzheimer's, and it's just scary. And, I always take issue when people say, start to quote anecdotes in the talk, because anecdotes are anecdotes. But we've seen this several times, and I run a group of clinicians we started about 3.5 years ago, and there's now 20 clinicians. And so all of us have cases like this. The Cleveland Clinic is probably going to run a clinical trial on this, and then they're completing a 9-month intervention with a group out in the West Coast with this kind of interventions, at least some of the stuff that we're talking about now. And then I'll just, the field is really changing rapidly. So with this woman, essentially we did a lot of what we're talking to you about today, and within a relatively short period of time, 3 or 4 months. So it is important to understand that this doesn't happen like on the turn of a dime. It takes, I would say, between 3 and 9 months to really get kind of results we're talking about, where improvement, real measurable improvement in cognition. We use CNS vital signs, which are computer-based, insurance reimbursable cognitive tool. We did it at baseline and at 6 months, and she was, a lot of her the cognitive domains that we test that match up the most with Alzheimer's or prodromal Alzheimer's, so visual memory, verbal memory, just sort of a general neurocognitive index. We were talking about less than the 10th percentile, so 2nd to 8th percentile, less than the 20th percentile in terms of for her age. And so we kind of did our thing. She was already doing pretty good with diet, but we cleaned that up a little bit, doing some of the, we'll talk about lifestyle today. Actually put her on hormone replacement therapy, which I absolutely don't advocate for everybody, but in the right person can be really useful. And she came back and she scored above average to average in everything. Her life was better. And that was we had follow-up neuropsych, it's a computer-based neuropsych test. I take about a half-hour battery. In 6 months, and she was feeling better in 3 or 4 months, to be honest with you. We just didn't have the results to prove it. So the earlier the better. And the other analogy, I think, cancer. Like when you get out to that sort of catastrophic brain function loss, if you think about stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, I would say, like you're starting in stage 3 once you have mild cognitive impairment, roughly, right? So it's a metastatic problem. By when somebody is already losing independence, which of course is the definition of dementia, when somebody's already losing independence, it's really hard. I mean, we can improve people's lives and make them happier and make them sort of, they're there more. We've had a lot of improvements like that, but fundamental cures or reversals, I don't believe until somebody does a trial on it, because I really haven't seen it. So you'll hear about these stories every once in a while, and I hear about them quite a bit, and I usually ask, I got to double click on a few things to ask more questions. But just so we're all on the same page, I assume this is a neuroscience group, so everybody knows this. So just Gladys, you could just stop me if you want me to move to the next slide. But just redefining Alzheimer's dementia. Of course, Alzheimer's we believe is the most common kind of dementia around the world. But dementia basically is a problem with thinking, a problem with cognitive function, as demonstrated on neuropsychologic evaluation, and then can't be independent, right? So can't pay bills, can't drive, can't remember to take medications. Just, if you leave that's kind of the difference between Jim Leverenz, one of the chairs at Cleveland Clinic in their Alzheimer's program, really a sort of a giant in the field of neuropathology. He once, I was in my fellowship, I spent some time with him. He once said the difference between mild cognitive impairment and dementia is like, yeah, they all have thinking and memory or some kind of problems, but if you left someone at home for 2 weeks, would they be okay, right? And if they would, it's probably mild cognitive impairment. If they wouldn't, it's probably dementia, right? So, but you guys know that there's, this is a sort of an academic debate, but that's just so we're all on the same page. Of course, there are many kinds of dementia. One thing I've learned from Dr. Leverenz, from Jim, is that probably there's more mixed pathology, and so this is growing. So mixed pathology, so meaning Alzheimer's plus vascular dementia. In fact, there's some theories, some really quite that are growing in popularity as sort of the amyloid and tau theories kind of take their rightful place as just sort of a piece as opposed to the main thing. The ideas of what drive Alzheimer's. But there's also the idea of a two-hit hypothesis that the primary problem is the vasculature or mitochondria. So you're seeing a lot of mix between Lewy body and Alzheimer's, or vascular and Lewy body. And I would say, when I'm seeing people and evaluating them clinically, I'm definitely thinking about the possibility of multiple kinds. So there's, and then of course there's like, new kinds of dementia being published, not all the time, but we're still learning quite a bit, right? All right. So when we talk about the newer concepts, and by what I mean newer, I mean within the last 5 years or so, 5 years plus. They've been talked about for longer, but putting them together in something coherent, which is still a work in progress, has been in the last 5, 6 years. It's important to understand it's a glide path. We all know that, but I think the general public doesn't really know. They're sort of thinking, hey, we're not going to tell dad, we're not going to tell my wife, whoever it is, about the issues we're noticing. We'll talk about, because basically we're just going to delay everything until we have to kind of take the keys away from mom or dad or whoever it is. And that's absolutely the wrong approach. It's like I don't say things too definitively, but that is the wrong approach. And things are changing, and things are changing rapidly. And it's just like heart disease or HIV. You don't put somebody on one medication. With heart disease, you put somebody on at least 4, depending if they had a bypass surgery or a graft or whatever, or a stent. You're going to put them on other medications because there's a recognition that there's multiple mechanisms for the disease. So Alzheimer's is no different. In fact, it might have more mechanisms. So this idea of multiple causes has given rise to multi-domain therapies and multi-domain interventions. So doing multiple kinds of treatments at the same time have sort of worldwide, probably some big studies. Mia Cavilpelto, the finger trials, probably gotten the most fanfare, but MAPT and Prediva in Europe, France, and U.S. Prevent. I mean, there's some big trials. Some of these are prevention trials, and some of these are early intervention trials. But the point is that multi-domain therapy, so doing more than just one thing, like here's your pill, is kind of all the rage, as you probably know. I like this term. I heard this term from Dale Bredesen, dementogens, right? We all know what an allergen is. We all know what a carcinogen is. But a dementogen is something that sort of give rise or is associated with in literature with dementia, right? And it could be really everything. So if you look at this list, you think, well, the same is true with heart disease, cancer. Like these are really all true for almost everything, right? So complex chronic disease, like one person has heart disease run in their family, one person might have Parkinson's runs in the family, one person might have cancer or Alzheimer's. But so this list are things that are sort of like in the literature, and there's more. I just wasn't meant to be exhaustive, but there's more that can give rise to Alzheimer's. So you got to look at these things. If you're not looking at these things, you're doing an incomplete evaluation. And part, again, we were talking a little bit before everybody joined us, where insurance right now is not reimbursing everything I'd want to do. So we have to be creative in terms of what we can get reimbursed for. And then we have to ask people to pay out of pocket for certain things. And that is beyond some people's means. And so until we have better clinical trials so that insurance companies recognize the value in some of the stuff that we do, we're stuck. And there are people that are going to have their needs unmet. I don't know if anybody recognizes this person. Richard. This is Richard Isaacson. He, to me, is one of the 2 or 3, at least in the United States, most important individuals in terms of Alzheimer's prevention. So I ran into Richard's stuff when I was still kind of a kid. And Richard's like a Doogie Howser. He went to one of the 6-year medical schools. So he was a doctor, an MD, by the time he was 24. And then did his residency at Harvard, I think it was the Brigham. And then he got this idea about Alzheimer's prevention. And the only place that would really entertain him was Cornell. And he had been trying to get published for years in the Journal of Alzheimer's and Dementia. And he just couldn't. And they were refusing him. He'd go to he'd go to the Alzheimer's Association parties, and he was always getting laughed at. Prevention, everybody knows there's nothing you can do. We'll find good drugs at some point. After 400 drug trial failures, now at this point over 400, the field, obviously, as you know, is looking for other kinds of solutions. And I do think that we'll develop some good drugs eventually for this. maybe some electroceuticals, some implantable devices, that kind of thing. But in the meantime, Richard's been working very, very hard at his own, I would say, his own peril, to get published. And in 2018, summer of 2018, he got his first journal article accepted in the journal Alzheimer's Dementia, which is important because that represents sort of the, that's the American Heart Association, so to speak, for Alzheimer's community. That's the journal of the Alzheimer's Association. So very conservative, appropriately conservative. They're wanting really good data. And Richard's starting to provide that. You could argue on his trial, but so his first methodologies paper came out in the summer of 2018, and this was really the landmark trial to me that changed. Like, now we can reasonably talk about Alzheimer's prevention and not get laughed at the party, right? And this was just last winter. This was last winter. I met with Richard. I got an early copy and met with Richard in his office in November of last year, and then recorded an interview with him. But it's a brave guy. I mean, it's just not everybody agrees with him. And so I've enjoyed my interaction with him. Lisa Mosconi down here, Robert Krikorian, who's down a little bit further down in Cincinnati, or some other pretty influential people. So in this kind of field. If you're sitting in an academic institution, you're being challenged that there's no data, Alzheimer's prevention is not real. Well, it's very young. But we do have data, and we have data in reasonable journals now. And there's certainly a lot more evidence, but in terms of very, very high quality evidence that's building, this was originally designed as a multi-center trial, but the Puerto Rico site, and he discusses this in the discussion section of his paper, actually because of the hurricane had to shut down. All right, so what are the pillars? And if you go to Alzheimer's University, I think it's AlzU. Richard's got some stuff up there that's great. It's all free. Tons of clinicians have done the training. Very, very useful. Very, very evidence-based. It's really useful. So, no surprise here. The 5 pillars. Diet, exercise, sleep, stress. Right, and we'll talk about each one of them. And I'd say another one, this is another one I have to add on, the environment, right? So you could talk about socially. We've seen a number of people go downhill. I just saw, tomorrow I'm seeing for follow-up, a woman who had no symptoms until she's like, her husband's like, about 6 months ago. That was when COVID started. And we, so I don't know exactly what it is. There was the Korean study showing people Alzheimer's, something about ACE2 receptor activity in people's Alzheimer's upregulated, and in the hippocampus. So if that's that's true, I don't know. I've thought a lot about this, but obviously we're still learning with COVID. But is it isolation? Is it is it lack of stimulation? And then over the summer there was another paper that was published talking about, and this has been known for a while. Caleb Finch and others, but U.S. University of Southern California, Tuck Finch has published about seeing extra histamine cells and under a microscope in people that have Alzheimer's. So they've sort of tethered that to the idea that people in zip codes where there's more air pollution have more Alzheimer's. So lots to think about. Some things we can assess, some things really beyond our ability to assess. I like this slide, so I'm just going to let you guys watch it for a second because I worked hard to make it. What's the healthiest diet? Gladys, I'll put you on the spot since you're the only person I talked to. What is the healthiest diet? Is the Mediterranean diet? Is it the ketogenic diet?
I don't know. My friend Nico Scarmia says it's the Mediterranean diet.
So Scarmia has done the best work. I mean, he's done, certainly in terms of the history, he's done the best work that I'm aware of, with the exception of Frankie Sachs and Martha Claire Morris at Rush, who we lost unfortunately this year. Those are obviously both giants. But Martha Morris, especially for our field, neuroscience, was really, for decades have been done, a lot of the good work on fats, of course. Again, I assume many people in this group know, but she passed away of cancer this year. I was privileged to interview her before she passed away. But she's running the MIND diet, which is essentially, it's a Mediterranean plus DASH diet. So yes, probably we think, Scarmias in that group have published on, on less Alzheimer's, less conversion from mild cognitive impairment to Alzheimer's. So yeah, that's the best data we have. But if you look at even now people are into keto, and what about Alzheimer's, what about Alzheimer's and diabetes, and how do I get my A1C down? So right now I would agree with you that either the MIND diet, which is actually, I like the MIND diet because it's pretty doable, doesn't cut out too many things, limit dairy, limit red meat, avoid highly processed foods, right? But like in general, the basics are going to be just like Michael Pollan's food rules, right? Like eat real food as much as possible. Things that don't come out of a bag and box, shop on the outside, you know, all the things we've heard of, shop at the outside of the grocery store, that are things that have been refrigerated or frozen, mostly plants, and then, you know, not too much caloric restrictions, certainly from animal models, and now we're starting to have some human stuff suggesting that there's some type of advantage, whether it's ketone production, whether it's the fact, you know, whether it's actually caloric restriction and mTOR activity, etc. But it does seem like not too much food, eating till you're just before you're full, as opposed to overly full, which we're all, you know, most of us are guilty of in this country, at least, because there's so much available calories. So then, like that's what to do. And then I would add to that, we like to measure. We like to measure micronutrients. And what I mean by micronutrients, you know, most people are able to get a vitamin D. But you know, other things like omega-3s, you'll see an amazing amount of deficiency in vitamin D. And I think from the finger trial, Kivapelto's group, I mean, we're seeing that some amount of DHA, whether you have to add the EPA, whatever, I don't know, and it's critical, but DHA, at least DHA, the component of fish oil or algal oil, those omega-3 fatty acids seem to be important. So you just vitamin D, omega-3s, and then obviously B vitamins. I mean, B12 is important, but we measure folate, we measure markers for inflammation that can sometimes point to nutritional deficiencies like homocysteine. All those things can be useful to measure. So nutrition, I would say, yeah, definitely important. But I think again, when you query the literature in terms of actual evidence for what is going to be best for your mind and your brain and your mood, exercise still takes the prize. You know, is that, again, I know there's some researchers here, is that because it's easier to study than nutrition? You know, nutrition science is kind of a tough thing to study. Maybe it's just because it's easier to study. I'm not sure, but that's, you know, some of the theories. That people always ask, like, you know, how much, what's the best kind? There's some trends on what's called dual tasking. Is anybody familiar with dual tasking? I'm not sure. You can just shake your head. I can show there's a lot of people I can't see. A lot of people hiding over there, feeding their kids dinner while they have to listen to me drone on. So there's some cool research out of UCLA, Sarah McEwen and others, on dual tasking, right? So combining cognitive training with actual physical exercise. Probably the best way to do this is dancing. I'm a huge dance aficionado. Somebody just sent me, a student here at Case Western just sent me a review article from last year on dancing and Alzheimer's. The dancing is well characterized and really good intervention in Parkinson's. But I think we could do better in Alzheimer's community here too, particularly choreographed type of dancing. So dual tasking. You know, in terms of doses, there are, as again you're probably aware, numerous trials going on around the world, looking at, you know, what is the right dose. You know, typically it had been, oh, whatever's good for the heart is good for the brain. I like this. When I talk to patients, I talk about three kind of general categories for, you know, talk about mood and mind, brain health. I learned this from a friend of mine who's like a trainer, a physical therapist, a really clever young guy. His name's Ryan Glatt. You know, three kind of categories: cardiovascular aerobic exercise, resistance training, so, you know, weights, and then motor and coordinative training. The more we learn about the cerebellum, the more we realize that it's an important hub in networks. It's not just like, you know, it doesn't just work on balance training, but it's really important for all kinds of cognitive function. So motor and coordinative training, so things like yoga and Tai Chi and dancing, etc., that it can be really helpful. What about the mix? The mix of all these things. So, you know, again, the jury is still out, so we try to get people to mix it up. We try to give people a simple sense of their sort of the rate of perceived exertion. You can use a scale like that. You can use Carvonin's equation. You know, if you really want to get technical, that can sometimes be too much for people to like really be checking their heart rate and their target heart rate. But generally, people have a sense of, you know, low activity, low amount of intensity exercise where, you know, if you're walking with a friend, you can kind of walk and talk and there's no big deal. But You get up to moderate intensity, which is when we already start to about real exercise that have benefits on the cardiovascular level, which we believe translate into the brain. And according to some data, it does, but we need a little bit better data for Alzheimer's and cognition. But moderate where it'd be difficult to finish kind of a sentence, a little difficult to finish a sentence, or vigorous where you can't really talk, right? You can't really talk, or you get angry at someone that's trying to talk to you while you're doing that kind of exercise. So, somewhere like 150 minutes or of the moderate intensity, or 75 minutes of the more vigorous intensity. And then I like to ask people to get into a group. If you can get into a group or some type of training or YMCA or Silver Sneakers, anything that has a group, you're gonna have better results. We've seen a lot of people that started with exercise and then from their group that they were exercising with became interested in nutrition or interested in other things. So this group dynamic, obviously, it's no secret. It's a sort of a well-known, fairly well-characterized thing at this point. But at least one, a yoga class once a week, and maybe get to with the weights once or twice a week. People are thinking, wow, you're telling me to exercise so much. When is there time to do anything else? Yes, exercise should be near daily, right? That's the in vogue term, near daily exercise, 5 or 6 times a week. Yeah, there shouldn't be too many days. It's like there's not too many days where we don't brush our teeth. You don't have to go to the gym and kill it for an hour. I mean, we're talking about 7 minutes. I mean, you can go on every single one of these recommendations. You can get for free on YouTube, and that's how we do it at our house. Since COVID, we had to get creative, and Xanax. I mean, there's tons of stuff, and you can basically get all of this, all 3 kinds of exercise through a calisthenics-based program. Well, you got to be in a little bit kind of shape to handle, some of the calisthenics. But so this is very achievable. So I have since COVID, now I can argue with my patients that tell me they don't have time and they don't have enough money to do this, because it's very possible to do this for free as long as you have an internet connection, which again, some people still are not even holding by internet connections. But for those that have an internet connection, you can do this for free. You just have to make the time, which is it can be a chore. Stress. Yeah, so this is obviously the stress and sleep. Diet and exercise are we kind of know about, right? But stress and sleep seem to be the malady of our times. Everybody knows about it, but we're all kind of stuck in it. And what's interesting, does anybody know, we talk a lot about these California groups, these USC and UCLA. I'm going to mention another group, George Slavich and Steve Cole at UCLA. They have a stress lab there. And they're doing transcriptomic studies where they're looking at gene proliferation and upregulation, where they're simulating situations of stress, acute stressors. And what they see is that the immune system function goes down. And so there's this whole line of, like the whole theory in Alzheimer's, that really the problem is the immune system. And the immune system gives rise to inflammation. There's a lot of theories on like this in COVID, right? It's inflammation that's leading to autoimmunity, blood-brain barrier collapse, etc. But that stress over time, so we know from Bruce McEwen's work at Rockefeller and some of his proteges, Sonia Lupians and Robert Sapolsky at UCSF, another California school, that it literally persistently elevated cortisol and a high perceived stress scale, which if you don't know about the perceived stress scale, it's a really nice free thing that you can do. It's a 10-question questionnaire. If somebody's getting 20 or higher, you really got to think about counseling or talking to them and show them basic deep breathing techniques. But these high stress or persistently elevated cortisol literally shrinks the brain, literally shrinks, and you usually see, what we see typically in MRIs is generalized mild and moderate cortical atrophy. And usually I just had a 51-year-old who's been having memory problems since he was 44 years old, flew from Chicago here to see us, and he had neuropsych testing in an MRI when he was 44 years old. Now he's 51. And nobody kind of believed him. Now his wife was like, no, I started to notice this. I noticed it in word finding. And so we have this really interesting case we've built with him, but he had persistently elevated cortisol. He's got a lot of other things too. He's probably got undiagnosed sleep apnea, which we're going to talk about in a second. But the other thing that shakes out here, and this pairs well with the hormone conversation, is that it seems that there's a period in life, and that's usually what Bill Thomas, who's another geriatrician turned sort of thinker, Robert Woods Johnson type of fellow, he he talks about the senescent period in life. We're transitioning. Everybody sort of accepts that there's this awkward transition from childhood into middle life, midlife, raising a family, doing the grind and the craze that all of us are doing. And there's there's adolescence, right? So that's sort of a rite of passage, and we accept that's awkward. But there's also this sort of period on the other side of senescence, where we're moving into elderhood, right? And it's, at least in this country, for most people that are sort of upwardly mobile or middle class, upper middle class, that are hustling at work and have families, and there's a period in life where bills become, as some people that are watching this, many of us may be already sort of be able to attest to, where stress is the highest, right? Bills are the highest. Our kids are no longer, we're more of a consultant to our kids than we are a parent. Our parents might be aging, and we might be a primary caregiver for them. Spouse health issues, siblings health issues just start to pop up more and more. And so there's this, it looks to us that there's this sort of uniquely susceptible period of time. And I think actually it's become something that I have a quicker go-to in terms of hormone replacement therapy, because hormones do provide some buffer, testosterone and a little bit estrogen, progesterone, and to some extent DHEA, although I'm less convinced of DHEA, which is an over-the-counter hormone that you could take. I'm less convinced of that data, but estrogen and testosterone is a little more convincing. And that it sort of buffers against cortisol, right? Doesn't fix the fundamental problem, though, is why is someone feeling so why do they have such high cortisol? But as you probably know, trauma, we ask everybody the sort of adverse childhood events questionnaire, unresolved childhood traumas that occurred usually, where they drew the line in the sand was 18. There's like a 3 to 6.5 fold increase in risk developing Alzheimer's if the score on the ACE questionnaire is 4 or more. So that's a really useful screening technique to use, a screening tool to use. So we talked about the perceived stress scale, and we talked about the adverse childhood events questionnaire. Both of those are really, really pretty useful. We use those in everybody. We use a Primus questionnaires. We have several questionnaires we use with people. Yeah, I just have seen. So this is just something that's it's rampant, obviously. Okay. Why is it not typing in here? There we go. Okay, let's talk about sleep. Nobody wants to talk about sleep. I make everybody talk about it. My team, my staff is like sick of hearing me talk about sleep. So like if I hear you talk about sleep apnea or insomnia one more time, problem is since 2017, it's risen as like a co-contributor, and it's rising the more good data we have on sleep science and sort of disturbed stages of sleep. I had to take some slides out of this because I get carried away. So glad to stop me if I get too carried away and run out of time and I'm still talking about sleep. But I think just to make it simple, I'm not a fellowship trained sleep doctor. Perhaps we have somebody on the line that is, and so if I'm saying anything that you don't agree with, please let me know. I usually talk about people with at least about 2 things at least, which is duration and quality. Duration, somebody sleeping 5.5 hours, clearly not enough. And then we have a conversation about why. Oh, they can't fall asleep, they can't stay asleep, they wake up at 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning, and their brain is just on, and they don't know why. Is it hot flashes? Is it urination? What is the reason? Trauma. We have people that ever since their. I remember I saw once a 61-year-old. She was having cognitive problems, and turned out she has been having cognitive problems since she went into menopause. She was now like 3 or 4 years post all menopause. Really wasn't having any symptoms. Very fit, like she was a trainer. And eats right, and a really healthy looking person. And she developed her sleep problems. She developed insomnia when she was 52 years old, when her 16-year-old son was sneaking out the window. Right, and she never understood. That was the trauma, whatever you want to call it. That was the trigger, and so you get like a therapy for that, and sleeping goes away. So understanding the root cause, what is driving this, right? So we can give her some Ambien or something, but like asking her, how did it start? It seemed to be more fruitful, right? Okay, so and then there's quality, right? The quality, there's a lot of ways to think about quality, but just a couple things that are easy to do in office. Again, I presume if this is a group of neuroscientists, probably know about this, but I like the SATED questionnaire. It's basically sleep satisfaction, a validated questionnaire. If your score is less than 7 on this, maybe we'll just do this together real fast. Everybody write this down. Take something, right? Satisfaction. Are you currently satisfied with your sleep? Rarely, you get 0 points. Sometimes 1 point, or always. Just write it down there. What alertness? Do you stay awake all day without dozing? And that includes 30 minutes after your carbohydrate-full lunch, right? Again, do you stay awake all day without dozing? If you stay awake all day without dozing, rarely 0, sometimes 1, always. What is this? Somebody's coming in chats. Okay, people are chatting. And then timing, right? How about timing? Are you asleep or trying to sleep between 2 and 4 a.m.? Rarely, sometimes, or always. Efficiency, do you spend less than 30 minutes awake at night, right? This includes the time that it takes to fall asleep. Less than 30 minutes. If you always take less than 30 minutes, give yourself a 2. If sometimes you take less than 30 minutes, give yourself a 1. And if you're always taking a long time to fall asleep, get a 0. And then duration, do you sleep between 6 and 8 hours per day? You know, that's, to me, the one that I struggle with. My 5 kids, the one I struggle with the most is the duration right now. Hopefully that remains my issue. But you know, if I get less than 6.5 hours of sleep, I think probably most people. I mean, there are like hypomanics that seem to be able to thrive on 4.5 hours of sleep, but that genetically is a rare variant. That is a real thing apparently, but that's not a common thing. As common as most of us push it. Okay, so then you want to take just add up your score. My score is 8. So if you if you're getting a 7 or less, really certainly less than 7, that requires a longer conversation, right? It requires, even if you don't have that time or you're not in a position, you just say, go to see a sleep doctor or sleep psychologist sometimes. And we send a lot of people for CBTI, cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. And then a couple of other things that are really useful screening tools. If you haven't heard of the Epworth Sleepiness Scale, this is a nice screening tool for sleep apnea, really nice screening tool for sleep apnea. And so I don't have time to go into it because we're going to run out of time. And then the other thing, if you're a person that sees in-office exams, I learned this from Dr. Gohar, who's one of my favorite professors actually, he was in the ICU. I learned he was a pulmonologist. We did ICU medicine with him. And Dr. Gohar taught me about the Mallampati score, and I use this with every single patient. So you're looking at soft palate and uvula, and basically, if you're a class 3 or 4, absolutely, it's certainly not diagnostic, but it is a wow, some low scores, guys. Thanks. Okay. So if the Mallampati's class score is 3 or 4, again, it represents that there's oropharyngeal crowding, right? So problem with sleep apnea, and I know that this group knows it, but I'm trying to give people simple language to explain to people. It's like slow drip brain damage, right? Low oxygen, lymphatic system's not moving. Every single night there's brain damage. Every single night. After 1 night of disturbed sleep, whether it's sleep apnea, insomnia, amyloid in the cerebrospinal fluid, so amyloid is one of the proteins that's implicated in Alzheimer's, rises. So people come back, oh yeah, it's fine. And my doctor said it's just mild sleep apnea. It blows my mind. It's mildly severe. I think a more appropriate term would be mildly severe, moderately severe, and then severely severe, right? Like, so we had to take sleep really seriously. And I think, again, we're just in this mode of like, hey, well, the guy is, if you meet a guy who's, 54 years old, he's got hyperlipidemia and diabetes, he's got a BMI of 35, and he snores so much that the blinds are coming off the walls and the paint's peeling. Yeah, I mean, it's not you don't have to do a sleep study, you just do a CPAP titration study. You don't have to, but like I cannot tell you the number of people that come in with cognitive impairment that have been denied a sleep study or nobody ever checked, and they might have atrial fibrillation, heart disease, hypertension, and they're just not overweight. And so I think what sort of got us into trouble, again, I can't prove this. I just, we used to think, oh, when somebody's got a heart attack, it means they have like crushing chest pains, radiating to their arm, radiating to their jaw. It turns out women don't at all, very rarely experience heart failure, cardiac symptoms or an MI like that, right? So I think we did this sort of men drive the bus on the sleep thing, and you have to be snoring. And women, of course, don't like to admit to snoring. I have that conversation all the time. husbands or spouses or partners have to sort of incriminate their wives. And it's not like snoring is not the only sign. I mean, it's just one sign. They go back to this oropharyngeal cavity. If somebody's got a small airway, right? Somebody's got a small airway, they don't need to be snoring. They don't have to have full-blown apneic events, right? You just have some, but essentially the problem is hypoxemia, it's low oxygen. That is the problem with sleep apnea. It's brain damage every single night. All right, I'll get off my box. So there's other things that could be disrupting sleep. Braces, sucking the thumb, all these things. Marijuana, alcohol. Alcohol is like, if you could design a drug that would disrupt certain stages of sleep, it would be alcohol. Not that I don't drink, I just don't drink as much as I used to once, learn about this stuff. Okay. What else? What else can be done? Sort of, what are the other things? We definitely query for dementogens. I'm asking people, do you live downwind from a coal mine or something? You just have somebody here today. That was the case. Hormones, we have a conversation usually about estrogen and testosterone I'm talking about. There's a window, if you're interested in this, look up the work of Roberta Brinton on estrogen, the critical window hypothesis. This is not a proven thing, but I could tell you I've seen improvements. I could just tell you anecdotally and based on the data that's available, but I can't, it's hard to speak publicly about these things because they're not the standard of care. Neurogenetics, we definitely talk about. I just want to mention one other thing with hormones. So hormones, there's things that are trophic factors that build the brain: testosterone, estrogen, progesterone, DHEA, vitamin D, B12. These are all trophic factors. If you're short, even if you're not red line low, but you're just that sort of yellow range. Like if I have it tomorrow, I'm going to see a woman. She's coming in. We just diagnosed her with Lewy body dementia. I have her neuropsych test that they just sent us right here, and her vitamin B12 is normal, right? What's the range? The range on that lab that I did is 232 to 1200. 232 to 1200. Her result is 234. Right? Like, so that's, because it's not in red or it's not in black on the report, usually it should just like race right through it. But like, we have to think about what's optimal, right? Think about what's optimal. That's what we're promoting. Okay, a couple more things. Neurogenetics, ApoE4. ApoE4 is the gene that's associated with the God gene, the Alzheimer's gene. Used to be absolutely outside of the context of an IRB approved research study. Nobody would check at ApoE4. To run it through insurance, it's between $500 and $2,000, kind of depending on whether you're doing it for cardiovascular risk factors or neuro. You can get them for like $40 at some of these other sort of the outside, the esoteric lab companies. I now routinely check for ApoE4, mostly because the people that are coming to see me want to know, and they're willing to be motivated. Like, they're either very motivated or they're willing to be, or they want to know for their family or whatever. So we definitely check for ApoE4. There's other PCON we trim to. There's a lot of CD33. There's a lot of other genetics we can talk about, but we don't have time. The whole thing is personalized. Just have to, you have to be able to have the time to ask people. So this is where a group visit. I designed a group visit for cognitive health when I was at the Cleveland Clinic. Because you can just get interactions and everybody's got the same questions anyways. You just learn more, you can educate people quicker. So it's a great model, the shared medical appointment or the group model. You can bill it for insurance. Oftentimes, if you can get enough people, you do better than seeing one-on-ones. Clinicians like to do it, just breaks up their day. Some clinicians like to do it, breaks up their day. So it's a great option for some people. And then lights and electricity, I'll just talk briefly about that as we close here. Standard, I mentioned a standard evaluation. Includes some blood work. I always send people to a neuropsychologist in addition to what we're doing, because the richness of the data from a good neuropsychologist is phenomenal. And then we do MRIs of the brain with volumetrics. So if you're a neuroradiology department or your radiology department is not sort of subscribed yet to either NeuroQuant or NeuroReader, which are the two FDA cleared software. So these are artificial intelligence that sort of map certain parts of the brain. And depending on whether you're talking about concussion or frontotemporal dementia or Alzheimer's is really where the best biomarkers are. Let's say it will describe like a hippocampal volume less than the whatever percentile, 20th, 25th percentile, which is a biomarker of Alzheimer's. But that's late in the game, so you usually don't see that early. And there are, of course, there's kinds of Alzheimer's or other dementias that aren't associated with hippocampal volume loss. But when I'm ordering an MRI, we're working pretty hard in our office to make sure they get the right kind, which is one with volumetrics. We use NeuroQuant here in Cleveland because that's what's available, but NeuroQuant or NeuroReader are the two that are possible. Light and energy. So photobiomodulation, so these are low-level lasers. This has gotten a lot of sort of traction in the popular. We recommend people use V-Light. V-Light isn't, they've had phase 1, phase 2. These are safe devices, very low levels of energy. They're in phase 3 clinical trials for Alzheimer's. I've seen spotty, I would say mixed results with the V-Light, but it's a fairly serious company, and I like the group. They have some stuff for Parkinson's now. But essentially, you're shining low levels of light, and I think they're not 100% sure what's going on. Mike Hamblin at Harvard is probably the main guru for this kind of stuff on the academic side. What we do know is that increased mitochondrial energy, ATP synthesis increases, and then I think one of the recent Hamblin and there's a guy Fapour, I think he's in Iran. Like they do a lot of publishing together at this point. And they go review the mechanisms, and they list 12 possible mechanisms, and 5 are pretty well characterized. The other 7 are sort of animal models, maybe this, maybe that. So not 100% sure why or how it's working, but it's been used in the musculoskeletal space for pain for a long, long time. And now these are being repurposed, retooled, and redesigned for kind of problems of mood and mind. So not only cognition, but also things like anxiety, depression. And we've seen mixed results. The reason I like V-Light, which is VIELIGHT, it's direct to consumer. It's pretty expensive, but you can get 80% of your money back within 6 months if you're not getting results. The other thing I would mention, so that's the light. The energy side, transcranial direct current stimulation is another thing. So these are like buzzing the brain, zapping the brain with very, very small amounts of electrical activity, like 9-volt battery or less, we're talking about 2.5. I think the safety data goes up to 4. Most of the machines only go to about 2.5 milliamps of voltage. Kind of dependent, where do you put it? There's several trials going on around for cognitive aging. Ben Hempstead at University of Michigan's got a mild cognitive impairment group going for transcranial direct current stimulation. So that's an interesting thing. We use that in office. I have some devices here that we use. Mixed results. I'm excited about it. Something else we can do for people, but it's hard to do an insurance-based model. It's a challenge if you're early on. I would start with diet, exercise, sleep, and stress, and then we're sort of referring people to a neuro like a V-Light or something. Continue to scoot. So what's the ideal approach? We talked about it, right? Just get a story from someone. You just want to get up a story, and then you construct your plan around what's going on with this person. Yeah, we got to tell everybody exercise. We got to tell everybody that. But I see a lot of people that they've checked the box on diet and exercise, and it's other things. Or I've seen people that I sleep really well and I have low stress, but they got diabetes. They're not exercising. And then we got to find ways to motivate them. So and I do like to check genetics because sometimes that can be motivating to people. And you just learn. Some people the data talks. Some people not. Some people just, you got to get them in a social environment that's gonna, they can't imagine exercising, but they can go and have a cup of Starbucks with someone every day with a group. So if you can get them in a group that first exercises and then they have coffee, even better, right? Let's finish up here. All right. So we just go back. I just go back to why people wait. We started with this. People don't have time. There's nothing to do. I think if you take nothing else out of this talk, I think don't wait. Don't. It's not just okay to wait. Again, this is the trajectory of dementia. By the time most people come in, they're at this sort of catastrophic mild cognitive impairment where they have profound amount of brain damage. Again, my analogy is to stage 3 cancer, stage 4 cancer, and so you gotta pay attention to the early symptoms. That's the deal. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful. So now we open the floor for questions.
So there's I think it's Shinju asked. There's studies. It's not studies. It's a study that was a very, very complicated statistical reanalysis of hormone replacement therapy. The question was, studies show that hormone replacement therapy may increase the risk of developing cancers. How do we benefit how do we balance and benefit harmful hormone replacement therapy? So I am going to turn you to the book by Avram Blooming and Carol Tavris called Estrogen Matters. They really go into this. Basically, the events of the world, the Women's Health Initiative, which a lot of, I think before 2001, 2003, 2004, when WHI's results were published. My wife worked a little bit in a WHI study when she was doing nutrition in University of Massachusetts. And like before that, it was malpractice not to give women estrogen replacement therapy, like hormone replacement therapy. And after that, it became like malpractice too. And now we're sort of in between. So to your point, it's an excellent question. I've spent probably literally hundreds, if not over 1,000 hours myself, like looking into like really a lot of time, because I was trained that we don't do hormone replacement. Like it's like not, like somebody's got low testosterone, you give them menopausal symptoms, you can give hormone, you can give HRT, you can give estrogen plus progesterone, but certainly no one outside certainly no one outside that. My thinking has changed. And I reserve the right to allow it to continue to evolve as the evidence evolves.
It's very unlikely.
I haven't seen it work a lot, and I used to try, and I don't like to stop people on too soon, but I'm not a huge Aricept guy. Namenda can work. Actually, I've seen Namenda work, and again, I'm curious to see what you guys have, what you're seeing, because you probably have more prescribing experience than I do. Namenda can be helpful though, especially when people are further along. Like I've seen it help like behavioral outbursts and stuff.
Definitely,
like,
yes.
That seems like it helps actually.
Yes. So do we have any other question or comment for Dr. Bergman?
Oh yeah, the Daniel Plan. I put that in the Daniel Plan. You mentioned spiritual activation. The Daniel Plan, if you haven't heard of it, it's pretty good. It's Rick Warren and Mark Hyman and Dan Amen, like some celebrity people, but we've seen it in practice working. It's mostly running out of churches, and I mean it's simple, it's social, and they get the metrics that couple of the metrics that matter. Super cheap. The church usually puts it on, and it's awesome. It's awesome. So that's a nice resource that you can that you can check out.
I heard that there is no prevention or cure for Alzheimer's diseases. So what's the good of seeking help, at the earliest possible time?
Erwin, when did you join us? You're going to call.
Pardon me?
How many minutes into this did you join us on the call?
I have listened to the whole speech.
Okay, so I'll go back to the beginning. Like when you say you've heard there's no, like that's what I'm here to talk to you about. Like I'm trying to bring you the stuff that's just recent. Check out here. I'll go back and put this up for a second. This article right here, because this question is the question that I usually get. This is the question this is the crowds that I usually talk to. Check out this article. When you say there's no evidence, there's nothing can be done. There is evidence. It's not as robust with multiple multi-center randomized controlled trials yet, but those are actually being designed and are coming. But there is some evidence that we can do either what's called risk reduction or prevent Alzheimer's at the American Academy of Neurology and the Alzheimer's annual Alzheimer's conference, international conference this summer, published that they thought 40% of cases could be prevented. There's a group down in Loma Linda, Dina Aisha Shirzai, both have great credentials. They spent actually some time with Scarmius. She did, at least Aisha did. Very impressive group. They're at Loma Linda. They have data that would suggest 90% of some of these cases can be prevented. So I no longer accept. Like I want to, whoever's asking that question, wherever you're coming from with that question, whoever's giving you that data that there's nothing to do about it, I think it's old news. I just don't think that whoever's saying that, I think is not current.
Okay.
That's my position right now.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking that.
Okay, somebody is just, I think to end this wonderful presentation about Lewy body dementia.
Yeah, Lewy body dementia. This is a tough one. I don't. So we know more about Alzheimer's. We're starting to learn about FTD and Lewy body. We're starting to see more Lewy body dementia. I think probably we'll see some, like we're seeing mixed cases. Of course, we won't know that until we have autopsies, and probably we'll never have autopsies on most of our people. But Lewy body dementia, I need to understand more about the early phases of Lewy body. We are seeing some kinds of improvement, but again, once somebody's fully demented, meaning somebody has lost a level of independence, it's in general difficult. It's in generally difficult to get a lot of improvement. You get some improvement, but like I saw a former doctor, he's 86 years old. His wife he's living with his wife in a nursing home. She has more of a advancing, closer to, she's got a severe, sort of closer to end stage Alzheimer's. He has a very early case of Lewy body. He's on 17 medications, 17 prescription medications, got insulin dependent diabetes. So I'll tell you, I think my guess is that he'll have some type of very, very significant improvement in the quality of his life in the next 3 months if he's able to do these things. If we can, I have people with blood sugars and their diabetologist saying, oh, A1C of 7.1 is good or 6.5 is good. It's not good. It's not good. It is a controlled A1C. Why don't we get off some of the medicines themselves can, of course we have to have medicines because not everybody's going to do all the things we ask. Got to put people on medication all the time. But in terms of a goal to keep an A1C at 6.5, a hemoglobin A1C of 6.5. No, the goal would be for it to be less than 5.6 off medications. That's the goal, right? So I don't know. The Lewy body dementia, it's for me, it's too early on to comment. With pre-Alzheimer's, we see really good results. Most people have, especially if they have a copy of APOE4, respond. Most people, not everybody, most people. With Lewy body, I think it's too early for me to comment.
I see your frustration with clinician inertia. With inertia.
Oh, whatever. Now don't we all have that? It's either the kids.
Yes, but I think you are rightly so, and we should expect more, and we should give more, definitely. So thank you so much again.
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys. I really appreciate the discussion.
And this has been a very, I think, practical in some ways. So asking myself, what can I do better for my own health? And the health of the people I love and care, but particularly thinking in how to integrate this to our Institute of Neuroscience memory clinics.